You have all the information about the speakers and all the participants in the smartphone apps. But just a short recap. We have here Stuart Ritson. He's only 29. He's been working in the specialty industry. You sent it to me in an email. You can't complain now.
That's true.
In specialty coffee for 7 years. He's originally from Cambridge in England. Stuart worked previously as a wholesale manager for Workshop Coffee in London, and now he lives in Berlin, working as a senior sales manager at Cafe Imports, and is one of the most handsome AeroPress Championship MC.
This is what I'm going to be known for.
Yeah. Then we have Hans Faessler. He's working in coffee production, processing, exporting, and marketing for the last 35 years. First in East Africa, later with Nestle in China, and since 1999 with NKG, primarily for the build-up of their plantations in Brazil, Mexico, and Uganda. And amongst a million other things, he also owns the Utengule plantation in Tanzania. Big applause for Hans. Then we have Professor Willem Ristenpart. He's a professor of chemical engineering at the University of California, Davis, and the founding director at UC Davis Coffee Center, which is an institution with a mission to become the leading source of scientific expertise in this field of coffee. Big applause for Will. And then we have Timothy Schilling. He's the founder and chief executive officer, I like to say chief everything officer, at World Coffee Research, the first global collaborative and agricultural research and development organization for coffee. We've been lucky to work together with WCR for quite a while. Dr. Schilling is a scientist and a development expert that started WCR in 2012 and formed dozens of collaborative partnerships with NGOs, governments, and coffee organizations. So, big applause for Tim. And our topic of today is coffee cultivation and climate change. So I'd like to begin with the first question, and that's the security of coffee supply chain in the light of climate change. Shall we be afraid that we run out of coffee?
Well, I'm happy to take this one. First of all, I'd like to thank Probat for being part of this exciting panel here. It's good to be here. Climate change is just one of the challenges facing coffee cultivation. And I would, to make a little bit of an excursion into this, I would put the challenges of coffee cultivation into two groups. One is actually the agronomy, field agronomy, the challenges in the field, pest diseases, varieties, and so on. And the second one, which I find actually more challenging or more damaging to coffee cultivation, are the market distortions, the massive cycles of prices, which is caused normally by imbalances in the market. Now, coffee cultivation has always been exposed to a lot of challenges in the agronomy, and this affects small as well as big growers, and even within the same country. Take Mexico, the growing conditions in the south in the southern state of Chiapas is very different than in the state of Veracruz. Just to say two of the major challenges as an example of the past is, for instance, the coffee berry disease, which has affected Kenya very badly and his neighboring country, and was controlled by resistant varieties or by chemical control, or the very devastating berry borer, broca, which has invaded Central America, which was successfully controlled by traps. So all in all, I mean, these challenges have always been there and have been met. Now, climate change is something that will surely accelerate the challenges and increase the challenges and the risk to coffee cultivation. And sure, it's high time to address this. Like research institution like yours. But let me please just make a few comments to the market side. The supply and demand imbalances causes massive cycles in pricing. And the farmer, in contrast to a shoe factory produces shoes for $15, makes a margin of $5 and sells it for $20. The farmers don't have that tool. The benchmark of coffee farmers is production cost. And if the prices go below that production cost, he starts losing money. And that's something which then particularly, say, producers which face fairly high cost, with, say, manual labor, like Central America, for instance, parts of Africa, they suffer particularly from such cycles. They can be very devastating. And you will ask, okay, what can we do about this? See, coffee is a commodity. There's a futures, and coffee trade and the market needs a future. However, there are excesses in this market, but they are not caused by the consumption side. They are caused by oversupply. These are typical cycles. The business is running well, the prices are good. Farmers or even countries encourage new projects to increase the production, and that builds a wave, which then starts rolling, and then comes, of course, the other side. It goes into the depression, and that aspect, it can, as we know, we saw in 2001 to 2004, has a devastating effect on small producers in particular. Now, there is no straightforward or simplistic solution to this. I would like to end my statement here with kind of giving a perspective by asking the question, what do good farmers around the world have in common? And I'm not talking about only plantations, also small producers. What do they have in common? I think, and you find them in Uganda, smallholder in Uganda, but you find also large plantations in Brazil. And you find in both countries also weaker producers. So what do they have in common? I think they have, first of all, an adapted, good agronomic protocol. They know their farm. They know the pests and diseases which are important in his area. He has a nutrition plan, not necessarily intensive. It can be also on a lower intensity. So he has this adapted agronomic protocol. And secondly, he reinvests in his asset, in his biological assets. It means he constantly introduces and replants his fields. By this way, that's one of the success stories of Brazil, by this way they introduce new knowledge, better varieties, maybe different planting densities, and so he is committed to this, and the commitment leads to that he reinvests into his industry. And thirdly, and finally, I think the good farmers you see, they take the cycles into consideration. One should not go blind, say, well, it's running fine, the prices are good, and we're making a lot of money.
You mean the price cycles?
Yes, the price cycles, they come and go.
Yep.
They have always been. You look in the history of the last decades, they have been part of life. So instead of trying to fight it in the first place, better to accept and take this into consideration for a good farming operation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was pretty insightful answer.
Yeah, but I first of all, I think we should not be scared. Fear is not the emotion that we should have for climate change. We should be prepared, and we should be serious, and we should accept the fact that climate change is there, and we have to deal with it. I mean, we're dealing, science and technology has gone far beyond just dealing with a temperature rise, putting people on Mars very soon, I think, things like that. So there's a huge potential in agricultural research and development to handle the climate, the change that's occurring in climate. It's not just coffee. All of the agricultural crops are going through this. Coffee's not any different. And we don't know that much about exactly what's going to happen on any farm or any particular country. You know, you hear the statistics. I mean, that there by 2050 there will be one half the suitable land for coffee than there is today. But at the same time, we're going to need almost twice as much coffee to fill the cups in 2050 that are going to be demanding it. So yeah, that sounds scary, but let's just dissect that just a little bit, because just some newer research by the same people who conducted that research also show that, you know, those are models, they're scientific models, okay? And it's true, they're as good as the model is, they're as good as the data that go into building that model. But what's also true is that if you just insert into that model the application on full sun plantations of shade, already it changes drastically the model, whereas it's not 50% of the land, but more like maybe 25, maybe 30, just by inserting that one thing. So the model is static. It goes from the data that it has, which does not include the factor that farmers are not just going to sit back and just let the change occur without doing anything about it. And personally, I think the bigger challenge in climate change, I think in research and development, there are technologies, and those technologies can be extended, can battle this problem, can take care of it, can handle it. But what I see the problem being is getting those technologies into the hands of the farmers. I think that's a huge challenge for the industry. If there's any rocket science to be done, it's at that stage. It's not we are already working on technology. Always, agricultural research is always working on climate change, basically. It's just now change is going faster. And we have the global warming, and so that's something new in the last few decades. But the agricultural research is always factoring in the change in climate, no matter what the situation is. We're working in those fields. We're working in a climate. What we do today is good for tomorrow, but maybe not good for the next 50 years. So anyway, I don't think that we should be scared. We should be prudent and accept the fact that climate change is there. We need to do something about it. And get together and do it. And I think the one of the major solutions is agricultural research and development.
I really like the thought that the model is just as successful as the data you're putting in. So you're saying that it's not just about developing new technologies, but like making the current ones more accessible to everyone, and especially getting them into producing countries.
Yeah, there's a lot of technologies out there that are already known by researchers and others that are sitting on shelves, but farmers are not using them. They're not coming into the farmer field for testing and farmer evaluation. Yep. They're not being tested in a scientific manner so that we can understand exactly the effects that they can provide a farmer.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
So I think Tim mentioned Mars, and so I think a logical conclusion is we should start growing coffee on Mars.
There you go.
Solve some problems. But I think part of the equation, and I agree with everything Tim just said in terms of the importance of research and disseminating research at a university. That's a big part of what we do. But part of the challenge for climate change is also starting to look for new places, new terrains that come into play for growing coffee. And so just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Santa Barbara, California, visiting some of the coffee farms. And so for those of you who aren't aware, California is now an origin for coffee. And so the 2017 harvest that they sold through Blue Bottle Cafe.
You can't get more hipster than that.
That's
Buying
yeah,
coffee grown in California.
I mean, you might imagine, California, it's a developed country. There's a lot of challenges economically, but they sold their coffee through Blue Bottle for about $400 per pound. So that shows that, in the world of coffee, there can be a lot of strong analogies with wine as well. I mean, in the wine industry, there's a market for a $2 gallon of wine, and there's a market for $50 bottles of wine. And so I think that's part of one of the challenges for climate change as we start moving into more developed countries to grow the coffee like California. We really have to accelerate that higher end of the market as well to pay for that higher price of production.
What other countries that you see that could potentially be producing countries in 20, 50 years from now?
I was also in Taiwan earlier this year.
Taiwan.
So
okay.
Taiwan actually has a very long history of producing coffee, but mostly for domestic consumption.
Okay.
And so they have a lot of tea, and they're busily ripping out tea and putting in coffee, just like in Yunnan in China.
Yep.
I think since we're thinking about that in terms of sustainability, another way of combating the climate change is how do we make this coffee, more sustainable? And one of the experiences I had in Taiwan, I had a phenomenal tasting experience there, where they'd combined their knowledge of making oolong tea from the tea plant with these coffee plants that they had there, and they prepared for us some oolong coffee leaf tea. And wow. It was phenomenal. It was delicious. It had all the bright floral aspects of a high quality tea with very little tannic acids, and so not much astringency. And so just imagine if all the farmers we're working with now had 2 commodity streams coming out, not only the coffee seeds, but also some tea from the leaves. So just thinking outside of the box, besides what we have been doing historically, that's another interesting thing we can do.
As long as they don't make them illegal in Europe, as they did with
One thing about the latitude, moving up in latitude, Taiwan, South Texas, this kind of thing, is that Southern California, is that you immediately, just like you mentioned, increase the price of the cost of production. I mean, you're talking about $400 a pound. Today, coffee farmers are making under $1 a pound. I mean,
yeah.
it's awful. So that how is that going to play out? Also, that's. I'm not sure that is the solution to climate change, and thinking that we're going to move into the temperate climates that are going to be warmer in the future and be able to sustain the demands of the market in 2030 to 2050. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we really need to address the problem now in the producing countries where it's happening and having effects on people's
ahead of time.
lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Stuart, what do you think? you have an insight to a lot of producing countries and
for this question, I feel like I'm the least qualified to give an answer, which is why I was politely staying quiet.
I am the least qualified.
I think, I think the key thing to answer the basic question, I think there's always going to be coffee. As long as that demand is there, which Tim pointed to, we're always going to find a way. There's always 2 views of climate change. One is the kind of doomsaying, this is the end, and the other is the technological view of humanity has confronted lots of incredibly complex problems before and overcome them. And the real answer is always it's kind of in between, right? So we have to acknowledge the big challenges while also looking to support things like you're doing, Tim, and many other people to change how coffee is grown and improve the lives of growers and make it more sustainable, because it kind of really isn't, and it's only going to get tougher. So I really just agree with what everyone else says and know that they have a better insight into this, for sure.
We talked about prices of coffee already, and it's a topic that the 2 of us we discussed some time ago, and that's the difference between the quality levels and the price levels of different lots, especially when roasters are buying directly or when importers are buying coffee from farms. That you have 2 groups of coffees or 3 groups of coffees. You have these 90 plus crazy fruity acidic Kenyas or Panamas that everyone loves, very expensive ones, so everyone takes the tastiest and the craziest lots. Then you have like the cheapest coffees on the table that people get to blend or just to have bigger portfolio. And then you have this middle group that's coffee of really high quality, which is a little below the specialty level or little 1 or 2 points more above the specialty level. But no one, not no one, but it's not as sexy and it's not as cheap as the cheap ones, and it's not as sexy as the fruity Kenyas. And this is often a problem for the farmers, because they end up with a big amount of very good quality coffee for a reasonable price, but it's not that attractive for a lot of roasters. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the this gap between prices and quality levels.
I mean, this is definitely something I've experienced moving from a roaster that was very, very dedicated to quality, and then moving to a broader portfolio of working with lots of different green coffees. And I think, I don't know if it's possibly a more European mindset, because I think the market here isn't as, the specialty market specifically isn't necessarily as broad. I see in the US and in some other places more of an acceptance of the idea that a great roaster can have an amazing microlot and also an 82-point coffee that they sell to offices or something like that. But realistically, that's the way specialty is. I see it going, and it has to go that way. And the nice thing about that is where roasters begin to understand this need and ask for it, importers like Cafe Imports and many other importers are available.
Are they?
Yeah, we are able to, but we're then able to purchase those coffees and sell them in a format that works. So for instance, it may not be farm specific. A lot of farmers maybe don't want their name associated with an 80-point, 81-point coffee, or they may not produce enough quantity to make that valuable for them, but we're able to purchase that a decent amount above the market level, which is, as you've noted, completely unsustainable as it stands, and offer those to roasters. And I think it's really important that people begin to accept that, because I think at a consumer level, there's a lot of interest in those coffees. There's a lot of interest in clean, simple cup profiles, as well as incredible microlots. And I foresee that being a big part of the growth of specialty, the industry buying more and more effectively high commodity or low specialty grade coffees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Hans?
Well, an observation which we see in the last, say, couple of years. Take 1997, 1998. The 5 top producers, which is Brazil, which is Colombia, Vietnam, say Indonesia, and take Honduras today, and California. No, they made in 97, 98 about 54% of the world production. No, covered the demand, Okay, fine, balances itself out. And today, they're already at 71%. And if I look at the countries, especially in particular Brazil, they have an enormous research and development behind them. They are the real powerhouse, and you see the increase in productivity in that country is amazing. And as a result of that, also paired with the Brazilian real, which has weakened, which makes the production particularly cheap in dollar terms. Of course, even as we speak, in a very strongly falling market, they have remunerative prices in Brazil. While so many producers at under 100 cents, where we are today, are already definitely making losses. So I don't know how this will continue, but I think we will have to look at different models, because especially countries with a high labor demand and expensive labor. I just have heard recently that in Colombia, you pay already 75 cents a pound for picking. Or look at Costa Rica, which have productions of 180 cents. Unless other models are found away from the futures, they will not survive. Or it's just simply like in Kenya. Kenya, these guys, if market goes down, the difference goes to 200. Market goes up, difference goes to 100. I think those producing countries which cannot mechanize and can never go into the intensity and the productivity of a Brazil, I think other models have to be found to make that production sustainable. And like World Coffee Research, if there's better support and more support to the local coffee institutes to work on more productive models and supporting that would make them a little bit less vulnerable to these fluctuations.
Yeah, basically there's a lack of maybe professionalization at many of our in many of our origins, and farming is a business, and your question addresses a business challenge. A farmer. Generally what I see is that farmers don't have the business savvy really to do these more complex negotiations. Yeah, it's producing a 90+ coffee, but that's going to be maybe, if they're lucky, 1/2 of their crop, and they're going to make good money on that. But the other half, what have they done? So they've made their relationship coffee with the super high price, high end roaster. But what about the other half of the coffee, so that all the farmers can really benefit, that the whole profitability of the operation is sustainable? It's many times not dealt with, and it really comes down to, making a business decision. The farmer must say, well, hold it, you're going to buy this at $4 a pound, but what about the other 60%? What would you offer him for that? Oh, no, we don't touch that stuff. Well, that's huge for a farmer, because he has to go back and basically just dump it at the best possible price on the local system, which ends in the farmer not making a profit finally, even with those high prices sometimes. So that has to change. That has to change. And we're in agricultural research and development, and as Hans mentioned, one of our major focal points in our next 5 years is to try to build up the capacity of the national coffee research institutions, human infrastructure, financial, so that they can produce solutions, technological solutions. But hey, there's also, we have to go beyond that. That has to be married with the business component, so that those solutions can, at the end of the day, bring the farmer the profit that they have to have, or we will not be here anymore. So it's just so important that and just one other comment there is that, as Hans mentioned, Brazil is incredible. It's in terms of their ability, research and development wise. Colombia, the same thing. But there are so many all the other, and look where they are today. But there are so many other producing countries where there's very, very weak and sometimes no coffee research going on. A farmer has no knowledge of even the variety that's on his farm. I mean, what's that? That all has to change, and we need to work together to make that change. It's not just going to be a World Coffee Research or a university or a company. It's really working together and focusing directly on these challenges and meeting them. We've got the wherewithal to do that. I think we should do it.
Mm-hmm. Are these kinds of educational projects something that you could collaborate on with, like you as the Coffee Center at UC Davis, with World Coffee Research, for example?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's our long-term goal, is to set up educational programs for everything across the entire coffee supply chain. And so, I'm a chemical engineer, so I'm really fascinated personally. My research and education focuses on what you do with the green bean after it arrives in the States, right? You roast it, you brew it, you do sensory descriptive work. But so much of the quality of coffee depends on what happens at the farm. And so we also have people at UC Davis working on plant sciences, agronomy, plant pathology, things like that. And we're delighted to work with, for example, WCR and other companies to make online education available, to make workshops, to have workshops going around for educational purposes. That's what we're building up the coffee center to do, to facilitate that type of education. And and I just want to echo like what Tim was saying. I mean, like many of the coffee farms I've visited, they have no idea not only like what the cultivar is, but like what's their soil pH. I mean, something that just the simplest question, and like they don't even really know that's a thing, right? And so disseminating that type of knowledge and that research, I mean, that's something that I think we very much want to do and should do.
And speaking of like cultivating coffee, it's a topic that's been hot for the last couple of months and couple of years, and that's cultivating specialty Robusta. Like, do you think we could come to a stage when Robusta will become actually tasty and
I hear some laughing down here.
The answer is yes.
The answer is most definitely.
Please elaborate.
Isn't it?
Most definitely yes. No, sorry to cut. He knows a lot about the Robusta has gotten a very bad image, unfortunately, but self-inflicted. That most of the Robusta is really a crude way of producing, of drying. I have just been at the warehouse in Hamburg, when some Vietnamese Robusta arrived, a big cloud dust came up, and so much more can be made out of coffee. Whatever has made Arabica a good coffee, much of this applies also to Robusta. And I just said to Tim before, I don't understand, good Robusta is very remunerative in price. Why have not more jumped on processing that coffee much better, growing it in locations where you also get a denser bean? If, for instance, grow Robusta on 1,300 meters, it makes a dense bean, it makes even so a slight acidity. You can make fruity cups, which is in at the moment. And I think there is a great market for that. And also you have to see that over the last, say, 35, 40 years, Robusta have grown from a market share of something like 15%, closing in on 50% of world consumption. It's high time to work on Robusta because, for me personally, the key to climate change and adaptation lays with Robusta.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. Yeah. The other thing to remember is that there's not coffee is a continuum. It's not there's not Robusta that sits in this little basket here in Arabica. There's no real pure Arabica because half of the genome of Arabica is Robusta. Robusta is the mother of Arabica coffee. So, that's one part of this, and we, as with the change in climate, we feel at World Coffee Research, we feel as if that area, I talked about that just a while ago, but between, let's say, 800 and 1,100 meters is probably the area in the coffee lands that's probably most at risk over the next 10, 20 years. Arabica really doesn't stand much of a chance there, and that is led World Coffee Research, which was born out of pretty much the specialty coffee industry and focused on Arabica. Now we are focusing also on Robusta, and a lot of it is aimed exactly at breeding a better Robusta, a resilient Robusta, a higher quality Robusta for that area, and it makes sense. We're just starting the program, and we're happy to be working with the Neumann Group and Nestle's and others on this venture. So
just want to add one point what you say. In a recent visit to Chiapas. In Chiapas, the farmers would always say, below 600 meters, you grow Robusta. Above 600 meters is Arabica zone. Looking at the climatic data, long-term climatic data of farms down there's some very good records there. It shows that really temperature have risen. And on top of that, they have massive rainfall down here, all there. And it's all not really the place for growing Arabica. It's too much.
It's in
So I think this zone of 600 meters has now gone up, say, to 750 meters. And on that altitude, with the right agronomic concept and the right processing, it leads to a very good quality Robusta. Just like it's already there in Guatemala, in India. Yep. I hear about some trials in Nicaragua as well. So a lot of places, Robusta has been detected as one of the options. And we had a Robusta tasting that was qualified with 84 points.
Yeah, and don't forget that Nespresso, they had the capsule from South Sudan. I don't know if any of you cupped that, but or had a cup of coffee from those capsules. It's actually outstanding, very interesting, very unique and sweet. It was I was amazed, but.
I know that you work with some farms in India, right, as coffee imports?
Yes.
Do you see a rising interest in Robusta consumption? And
I mean, yeah, this is the one point I was going to make on the more marketing on the specialty side. I mean, as a company, historically, we've offered India Robustas and a few other Indian coffees, but they're typically for roasters who have that within a wider portfolio, or maybe they've been roasting for a long time. It's definitely not a sexy coffee, and definitely not something easily marketable. And I think that's the other big challenge is we were just talking about this before we came on stage. I mean, I, as someone who's worked in cafes, worked in roasters, now working in green, I've never really been exposed to Robusta. At any of those levels, whether you're behind a bar or whether you're speaking to a roaster, how can you champion something if you don't know what its potential is and you don't have any sense of it really? So I feel like one half of the challenge will be obviously bringing the preparation techniques that have been used for Arabica to Robusta, improving the varietals themselves. But then a huge issue, even if you had the best Robusta in the world and it's a delicious cup, if you can't get anyone to even try it, then there's no point. So really, to me, that seems like the biggest challenge is bringing it into specialty by exposing people to its potential and getting all of us more aware of what the cup profile could be like.
So I can't resist bringing a chemistry point of view to things. I mean, so one of the big differences between Arabica and Robusta is that Arabica is about 8% sucrose by mass, whereas Robusta is on average about 4%. So Arabicas have about twice as much sugar present initially in the green. And much of the flavor of coffee comes from Maillard reactions between the reducing sugars present in various amino acids in the beans. And so you're just starting with different materials when you roast. And even now in the published literature, the type of things that Scott Rail was talking about this morning in terms of how the kinks and the crashes, how those affect the flavor profile, even that's not really quantitatively understood for Arabica, much less so for Robusta. And so I think much of this, right now it's like trial and error, but I think having a deeper fundamental scientific understanding of all the very complicated reaction pathways that take place during coffee roasting could help shed light on how to make a Robusta sweeter and taste better, and then help the coffee industry as a whole.
Most definitely. I think if you look historically, there were a lot of good coffee institutes out there decades ago. Good one in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Central America, everywhere. They had really good coffee institutes, but that has slowed down. But there have been a lot of work done on Arabica, on quality of Arabica, on selections, on breeding in the traditional way in the old days. Now, today, we can create hybrids which have, the same cup profile and so on. But Robusta have been left behind.
Yes, exactly.
And had this stigma of poor coffee. When Robusta pops up, one has that harshness of Robusta in your mouth and you think, what terrible stuff. But if Robusta is harvested selectively, wet processed and dried, that flavor aspect disappears totally. It's a totally different coffee. It's a very rich, it's a strong, beautiful coffee, which of course a different profile. It has no acidity. It doesn't have the flavors of Arabica, but it makes fantastic espressos, and therefore I think there is enormous potential on the breeding side as well as on the agronomic concept and on the processing.
I agree.
So we can expect in the future, in 40, 50 years, to have specialty Robusta grown in the German mountains.
Sooner than that.
Sooner than that.
Sooner than that.
And then Mars.
Swiss.
And then
Swiss,
Mars. That's
Swiss mountains.
Swiss mountains. True. I remember we talked a little about China when at the beginning of the discussion, and that's to me a very interesting country in terms of both consumption and production of coffee. Where do you see the future of China in terms of coffee production? Because the whole Yunnan area, I do have a friend who has a farm there, and I received some samples. I should ask for some greens to try it on my popcorn maker. But I tried some of those samples, and it was excellent coffee. Most of it wasn't that good, but some of them were really tasty. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about the cultivation, innovation, and basically the potential future of China as production country.
Well, I had the pleasure and honor, together with my wife Monica, to start in Yunnan this whole coffee production in the prefecture of Simao. Which is where it is today. It's called Pu'er today. Pu'er was a smaller town further west, but so I had the pleasure to go there with the first varieties, making the first trials, training technicians and so on. Only once in a lifetime you get the chance to start coffee in a country. That was a little bit, I must admit, up towards Myanmar at that time.
What year was this?
That was at the end of the 80s, right, 1990, you know.
Perfect. Okay.
So was the start of that, and at that time I had my hesitations that this would be a relevant producer actually, because I saw too much competition from tea. It's a tea growing area, famous tea growing area, Chinese drink tea, and it was there was competition from other crops simply. You know, there's lychee, and China is a big market, demand for everything. So I never thought it would go to big scale, but at the time, the concept of growing there, terracing the land and the varieties and the production came up. Production was good. It hit a good price phase as well, and that triggered a big momentum in coffee cultivation. And so today, I think China produces about 1.7 million bags, which is a massive success for China. You know, from zero to this. I mean, this by anyone's standard, this was really a big success in China, and the quality. You know, it was from the beginning on. It was Arabica on an altitude anywhere between say 800 to maybe 1,000 meters, and these basically all Catimores varieties, the original ones, they're from Portugal. And so it turned out a good coffee. Now, interestingly, today, quite a bit of that coffee is actually exported and replaced by a lot of Robusta. You know, because China primarily, Nestle has a large share of that market, and that's more Robusta driven. But the quality is excellent. I'm sure in 10 years, there will be no more exports. I think China has come to the taste of fine coffees, there's a specialty market developing fast in the cities. So when you ask about how much can China produce, it's a matter of economics, I think. At the moment, there is no more land available, and China government is very strict in exploring, deforestation or anything of this is forbidden. So it can only replace tea. And that's a matter of economics, I think.
I just wanted to get in from my actual background before working in coffee was studying in China, and I spent a lot of time there.
Didn't know that.
And at that time, like 9 years ago, my coffee experiences in China were pretty poor. But my experience politically of China, and obviously, this is just my opinion, is that this growth in coffee will probably not create the origin experience in the sense of people around the world buying Brazils and buying Ethiopian and buying all these different coffees, because I think the demand within China as it grows will be supplied mostly by Chinese grown coffee. If you think about going to a supermarket here in Europe or in America, you rarely ever see a Chinese grown product, because the attitude of the government and businesses there is to be self-sufficient. And I think the growth in coffee will inevitably mostly supply, in my opinion, the local demand, which is still very small,
Kind of makes sense, yeah.
but it's gone from being someone having a cup of coffee a year to 2 cups of coffee. That's 1 billion more cups. So, you know, that's
Mathematics.
so even as I see, and I had an amazing cupping of Chinese coffees earlier this year from a producer and roaster there. But I don't imagine ever seeing those leaving China in great numbers. So it's a surprise to hear that they're actually exporting a lot at the moment.
I'll share one quick observation on the China tea versus coffee thing. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk at Zhejiang University in Hangzhou in China, and the professors in the front row with gray hair, very skeptical about coffee. But all of the grad students behind them were all drinking coffee. So I think there's very much a generational change, and I think that's the way it's going.
That's great. Well, I think coffee versus tea, that could be a theme for another separate panel that we could have sometime in the future. Unfortunately, we have to go for lunch now. If you'd like to talk more about starting producing coffee in your country and be the first ones, you know who you should talk to during the lunch. I'd like to thank you to everyone who participated at the panel discussion today. Please, big applause to Tim, Hans, Stuart, and Will. And let's hope the future will be bright.